What happens when you tell the narcissist that he or she is an abuser? Next to nobody knows that they have been ensnared by a narcissist the first time that it happens. Indeed, in some cases, the victim has no awareness until the second, third, or even fourth occasion when this happens. The awakening moment usually happens post-escape, or more usually post-disengagement. This means that the opportunity to express this newfound knowledge is reduced, either because you are now maintaining no contact, or the narcissist has disappeared, for the time being, with a new victim in his or her grip. Accordingly, the opportunity to confront the narcissist to tell them that he or she is a narcissist is reduced, and you will learn more about that in the video where you declare, no, you are the narcissist. What is more likely to happen is that the victim recognizes that they are being abused, or if they don't use that word specifically, they do at least realize that the way they are being treated is in a way which is wrong, unpleasant, or disrespectful. There are, of course, a whole host of reasons why the victim may fail to recognize what is happening to them, and indeed act on any awareness that does occur, but those are matters to deal in a separate video. If you realize that you are being abused, what will then happen when you turn to the abusive narcissist and tell them that they are an abuser and that they are engaging in abusive behavior with you? Let's address first of all the lesser narcissist. The lesser narcissist is unlikely to deny the behavior that you complain of. The lesser narcissist tends to use physical violence, sexual violence, verbal violence, and property destruction as the main methods of implementing abuse and asserting control. This is because the lesser operates in a rudimentary fashion through the sudden explosion of heated fury. Make a point to a lesser narcissist that he or she does not like, you can expect as a minimum to be treated to the eloquent response of "fuck off," a punch to the face, or quite possibly both. This is more common with lower lesser and middle lesser, can occur with upper lesser type B, less obvious with upper lesser type A. Unrefined, vulgar and crass, the response of the lesser to being wounded or a threat to control is to lash out in a bullying and obvious manner. Should you tell a lesser narcissist that he or she is an abuser, you will generate two responses which are similar in nature. If you make this allegation in a neutral manner, thus free of fuel, you are likely, although it's unusual, that you will wound the lesser because you're not providing fuel and this threatens the control. This will cause wounding and result in an ignition of fury. Accordingly, heated fury follows, and you will find yourself on the receiving end of the types of violence which I've described earlier. More likely, when you tell the lesser narcissist that he or she is an abuser, you will do so in a way which provides challenge fuel. You'll probably be upset, hurt, frustrated, or angry when you level this accusation at the lesser narcissist. This means, of course, that you are providing fuel. Nevertheless, the lesser narcissist's narcissism will interpret your allegation as one which threatens control by challenging his or her entitlement to treat you precisely as he or she sees fit. Remember, in the eyes of the narcissist, you are an object, a possession, and we are entitled to treat you as we want. Do not forget that we have the overwhelming need, unconsciously, where lesser, to control and abuse is a significant method of control. Again, in our world, the need to maintain control and the fact that abuse facilitates control results in its validation. Finally, add into the mix that the lesser has no emotional empathy whatsoever. Your challenging of our perceived right, the challenge to our entitlement, the paranoia-stoked rebellion to our necessary control, means that if you scream at the narcissist, at the lesser narcissist, that he is a hateful, abusive bastard, this means you issue challenge fuel. His response will be: A. He instinctively recognizes that there is more fuel to be obtained here, and therefore the simplest way to gather that precious fuel is to provoke you and B, instinctively, unconsciously, there is the recognition that you are challenging his superiority, you are threatening his control, and this amounts to an insurrection on your part, and your insurrection must be quashed. Since the lesser narcissist operates in a rudimentary fashion, his or her response will be to give you another dose of the abusive behaviour to get you back into line. The lesser never explains, never justifies. He or she just does, because he or she is entitled to do this. And if you do not like it, tough shit. In the same way that a lesser will state an opinion, and all who disagree are automatically labelled as idiots and morons without explaining why they are, the lesser narcissist responds in an automatic knee-jerk manner based on their unwavering belief that they are right and entitled. The lesser doesn't recognise that the behaviour is wrong. It's your fault. You deserve this behaviour. He or she cannot empathise with your pain and hurt. Instead, he or she will only see the need to increase it in order to exert control and gain more fuel. The lesser doesn't actually address the allegation in any way which you recognise as dealing with it, but instead will launch a verbal attack against you to deflect from your allegation, to put you in your place, and ultimately increasing your misery. A fist will be driven into your face, or you're shoved to the floor and given 2 swift kicks. You ought to know your place, and that is one of submission. If you tell a lesser narcissist that he or she is an abuser, expect an aggressive response designed to quell your rebellious accusation. This is most prevalent with lower lesser, middle lesser, and upper lesser type B. Upper lesser type A are generally less aggressive. However, they remain lessers, and although their aggression does not tend to be seen, indeed, they manifest more as driven, enthusiastic, and are hugely superficial. Even they will manifest ignited fury with such a challenge to them, and you could find yourself on the receiving end of violence from an upper lesser type A also. What then about the mid-rangers? The mid-range narcissist will adopt a defensive response to any accusation of him or her being an abuser. Just like the lesser, the manner in which you make the accusation is most likely to be the provision of challenge fuel. Being far more passive-aggressive in nature, the mid-range narcissist will not lash out with a more of the same is good for you attitude that the lesser adopts, but rather they will continue the abusive behaviour through defending their reputation and justifying their behaviour. This operates as follows. In essence, they will start off by denying it. I'm not an abuser, how can you say that? Remember, the mid-range narcissist believes that he or she is actually a decent person. That is their true perspective, and therefore it just does not compute that they could be labelled as an abuser because it doesn't accord with their own view of themselves. They have no insight. Further, not only has the comment offended their view of themselves, but it also offends their view that they have always been good to you. When you are asked, how can you say that? Or you might receive the response, I know you get upset with me at times, but that is because you overreact. A further key response of the mid-range narcissist to being accused of abusive behaviour is to automatically blame shift. Notice in that instance they don't deny that the act has happened. They know that it has been done, but rather it is your response which is the key to the mid-ranger being able to avoid any culpability. It is again your fault. Whereas the lesser lets you know that it's your fault just because it is, the mid-ranger will, at least most of the time, explain to you why it is your fault. You are too sensitive. You take too much to heart. Don't be silly, you read too much into things. Thus, the narcissist dilutes the effect of the behaviour by suggesting it is actually your perspective which is the problem and not the narcissist. If the mid-range narcissist does not suggest that it is the perspective of the victim that is the issue, then they will blame shift in a further way by glossing over the abusive behaviour and instead focusing on the victim as being the catalyst for the abuse, and therefore it cannot be the fault of the mid-ranger. He or she does not necessarily deny that the behaviour has taken place, but their automatic need to maintain the upper hand, i.e. control, means that their perspective ensures that the victim is the one who is blamed. Accordingly, you will hear comments such as these. I know you get upset when I don't speak to you, but if you let me have some peace and quiet rather than nagging me all of the time, I wouldn't have to give you silent treatments, or I wouldn't have to not speak to you. Or, I slapped you because you were out of order shouting at me the way you did. That is no way to talk to your husband. The mid-ranger also deflects by ignoring the abusive behaviour, again not denying that it's taken place, but removes any validity of the accusation by deflecting, and does so by pointing out all of the good things that the mid-ranger does for the victim. So, for instance, there is a good dose of projection in these responses too. I cannot believe you pick on one minor incident where I lost my temper after all the things I have done for you recently. I find it a bit much for you to accuse me of such behaviour when I've been working my nuts off to provide for this household. That really is not fair. Do you know how much pressure I've been under as of late? I said those things because they are true, and you don't appreciate anything I do for you. Nothing at all. You always seize on the one thing which I apparently do wrong and castigate me for it, whilst you ignore all of the really things that I do. How is that fair? The false mea culpa. The mid-range narcissist may well acknowledge that what they have done is unpleasant and hurtful, and rather than blame shift onto the victim, as described earlier, they transfer culpability to something else. For instance, I don't know what came over me. I think someone must have spiked my drink. I have no idea why I did that. It must be all the pressure at work. That's not me that does that. It is like there is some demon or something which takes over me from time to time. I think I need some help. Will you help me? I know there is something wrong with me. I just can't help it. It isn't real me. I want it to stop. I will see something about it and together we can conquer it. Notice how there is no accountability. It is some other force or event which has caused the aberrant behaviour. The mid-range narcissist also deflects from what they have done by making it all about them in terms of being a tortured soul, needing help, needing the support of the victim. This apparent contrition not only regularly cons the victim, because it is not genuine, but it is just a further manipulation, but it also results in plenty of fuel for the mid-range narcissist, as he is fussed over by the victim and third parties. The bottom line with the mid-range narcissist is that they will never accept that they are an abuser. Their narcissism blinds them to it. They are not programmed to do it because they have no emotional empathy. They might understand how their conduct is considered as wrong by you from what I call the majority perspective, and from other people who adopt the majority perspective, because the mid-ranger has an increased cognitive function. But the narcissism will not allow the mid-range narcissist to accept accountability. If it did, the narcissist is transferring control, and the narcissism has not done its job. Furthermore, the narcissist would lose fuel, and therefore the narcissism must ensure that, in effect, the narcissist is automatically conditioned to reject any suggestion of culpability or accountability for the abuse. The victim will be suckered into thinking either it is their fault, they have overacted, they have been getting on the mid-ranger's back more recently, yes, of course, with justification, but they are dissuaded from seeing it that way, or that the mid-ranger recognises and accepts that they've abused the victim. Typically, rather than get away having apparently secured the truth as a truth seeker, the victim stays in the hope of securing the healing of the abuser, which they long for, alongside all of the other reasons driven by the emotional thinking, which causes a victim to remain with an abusive narcissist. The mid-ranger will maintain the facade that he or she is a good person, will blame shift, and then, if necessary, create waves of sympathy for their behaviour, yet still never, ever accepting that they are to blame for it. The greater narcissist and ultra knows that the behaviour is abusive and sees it as entirely necessary to the fulfilment of his or her aims, namely control within the prime aims. The greater and ultra, also lacking emotional empathy, guilt or remorse, sees what they do as a function, a necessity. The greater narcissist and ultra know what they are doing, but the overriding need for control and superiority means that it is entirely acceptable to abuse. Of course, our awareness recognises that to make such an admission to the victim is a foolish one, as this would cede control to the victim, which is something that must never happen. The greater narcissist and ultra-narcissist adopt a triumvirate approach to any allegation that he or she is an abuser. 1. Total rejection. 2. Misperception. 3. Potential threat. Through total rejection, the greater narcissist will just dismiss the allegation, able to control his or her ignited fury with a far greater degree of control. The glacial, greater or ultra will just wave a hand and tell the victim, "That's not abuse. Punching somebody is abusive. What I did is nothing like that. It's not abusive." Don't be so silly. I didn't abuse you. Does an abuser take someone to the premiere of the new Bond movie and the after-performance party? No, they do not. The greater is able to do this because he or she has controlled their ignited fury. The fact the greater or ultra speak and operate with a supreme confidence and conviction, and because the nature of the abuse doled out is done in such a calculated, insidious and mind-fucking manner, that the victim with eroded self-worth and reduced critical thinking is easily led to the conclusion that it cannot be abuse. The greater and the ultra act with plausible deniability. There are no marks from the kick to the lower back that a lesser would leave, no fingertip bruising from the mid-range hand about the neck, no witnesses, no observers, no evidence. Your word versus ours. Misperception is also used. We enjoy gaslighting you, as the finesse and skill required appeals to our most sophisticated approach to abuse. Of course, whilst we see this as an almost noble way to abuse, it remains abuse nevertheless. Don't be silly, darling, that never happened. We must get you back to the doctors. You're imagining things again. I told you not to mix that medication vodka. See what it has done? It has you thinking horrible things about you and me. Events never happened. Actions have been perceived by you inaccurately. Throw in the game playing of the string pulling within our coterie and our lieutenants, and you will find yourself in a dizzying and disorientating nightmare where the abuse never did happen because of your mistaken perception. Finally, potential threat. Greaters than the ultra do not bandy threats around. Indeed, it is implicit by our nature. The ever-confident greater and ultra may well admit that the abuse has happened, but makes it very clear, with that accompanying reptilian smile, that if you ever breathe a word of it to anybody else, then the resulting repercussions will be 100 times worse than what you've experienced before. Nothing needs to be said. It is a gesture, an expression. The jet black eyes fixed on you, and the steady delivery of such a threat readily convinces you that this is the case. Having experienced the abuse and also being well aware of what the greater is capable of without the greater even having to allude to it, the greater's admission will get you no further forward. Instead, you may think that you have gained some power through achieving this admission in private, but it was not a transference of power. It was in effect the assertion of power over you, almost daring you to go further. And you have a sword of Damocles hanging over your head now, reminding you of the implicit but never spoken threat attached to acquiring this power. In reality, you have no power at all. With any form of abuse, it is important that you understand that it is entirely pointless to try and gain acknowledgement from the abuser. You will never receive the validation that you seek, and instead you will face further abuse and manipulation. What you must do is recognise that you are being manipulated and abused. Utilise the materials set out in my books, Manipulated, The Devil's Toolkit and Black Flag, to give you that validation. As within those pages you will find all the confirmation you require, and then this will give you the logic to move to the next stage, which is the application of getting out and staying out. It is not about trying to get the abuser to accept what they are. You cannot do that. It cannot be achieved, and moreover, it runs contrary to your best interests, because you will remain in a situation which is not good for you. This is what happens when you confront the narcissist and tell them that he or she is an abuser. Understand this and recognise the recognition is not something that you must seek from the abuser, from the narcissist, but that you recognise that it is happening to you, and then you get out. Thank you for listening.